Rescue stories in general have become a form of what I call CS porn. In many cases, they become part of a company lore. So I had this client with great pride, relishing the details of the story. The CEO would describe how their person took it on themselves to get on a plane from the US to Scotland and physically deliver those just in time for this key event. But it's a terrible story. It's how many things had to go wrong for that even to happen. Later had a conversation with the CEO. I said, what would happen if you found out without asking permission, somebody went, bought a ticket to Scotland to deliver something they should have delivered 2 weeks before then? He said, well, they'd probably get fired. Then why do you tell the story? It's a nightmare story. Rescues are a disaster, actually.
Welcome to Customer Unsuccess, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders, failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best. Now let's dig into it. On this episode of Customer Unsuccess, I talk with Greg Daines. He's the CEO of ChurnRX and the co-founder of Customer-Led Growth Forum. He has over 20 years of experience in CS, and we bust the myth of heroic rescues and how they often spell doom for retention. You'll also learn why happy clients aren't the ones who stay. Really enjoy this conversation. I hope you do too. Now let's dive in.
Okay, great.
Cool. Let's kick it off.
All right.
Awesome. Well, Greg, thanks so much for joining the Customer Unsuccess podcast. It's great to have you.
Hey, thanks. My pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Good stuff. So if you're not familiar with Greg, Greg is the CEO of ChurnRX. He has a wealth of experience in customer success, post-sales, customer retention. So he's got a ton of stories, and I'm excited for him to share those with you. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about really the theme of when we think we're winning, but we're actually not. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, totally. It's incredible how often we think we're doing a fabulous job, and actually it's going very wrong.
No, I totally get that. And it's hard to also take a step back and really kind of be self-aware of those situations and kind of self-evaluate. But I guess tell me, I'm sure you have tons of stories. I know we talked about one in particular where it seemed like it was a crazy success story. Someone was flying out to save a deal or save a particular, situation with the customer. But I'm curious to hear about that one.
Yeah, well, rescue stories in general have become a form of what I call CS porn, which is, something we tell these stories, and they, in many cases, they become part of a company lore. So I had this client, it's a tech company. Most of my clients are SaaS tech companies. And they had this one anecdote, which they would share with everybody when they started the company, and they would share it all the time they would share this. The CEO loved this story. And it was from the early days of the company. They had a client. I don't remember what went wrong, but they had a big delivery, and they had actually physical materials that had to be somewhere, and for whatever reason, they didn't get there, blah, blah, blah. And so with great pride, relishing the details of the story, the CEO would describe how their person who was in charge of the account took it on themselves to get on a plane from the US to Scotland and physically deliver those just in time for this key event, blah, blah, blah. And this would communicate this sense of, this is the kind of people we are. We're very customer centric. We're all about the customer. We do okay. But surely you can see what's wrong with this. It's a terrible story. It's like one of the worst stories you could tell. And from two different perspectives. First of all, how many things had to go wrong for that even to happen? Okay, let's set that aside, because that's so obvious. Everyone on this session is seeing that in painful relief.
Sure.
But there's another thing wrong with this story, which is, why would you set this up as the standard of what good looks like? First of all, it's not repeatable. I guarantee you, and I later had a conversation with the CEO after I heard this. I said, what would happen if tomorrow you show up at work and you found out, without asking permission, somebody went, bought a ticket to Scotland to deliver something they should have delivered 2 weeks before then? how would you feel about that employee? He said, well, they'd probably get fired. Then why do you tell the story? You see the problem here. This isn't actually a standard of good customer management. It's honestly, it's a nightmare story. It should be told, but in the opposite context, as a cautionary tale of everything not to do with customers. And anyway, it sets up a whole bunch of things that I've found to be true. I said that rescue stories are a category of CS porn. We talk about rescues all the time. Rescues are a disaster, actually. I don't know, if you've ever had this sense, but I remember. So my background is I was a founder, CEO multiple times. And I only got into customer success because I think it's the most interesting problem in business. And that means I'm endlessly engaged with it and never get bored with it. But one of the things I felt when I was running a company was, we'd do these rescues. Something would go wrong. Everybody would pile on. The customer was mad, whatever. We'd all, take my attention, take everybody's attention. We'd finally, in some cases, rescue the customer. Not always. In fact, not even that often. But then when we would, it was like high fives all around, patting each other on the back. Everything's good. That's good, right? No. So here's the proof. In my more recent tenure career as a consultant, one of the things we get to do is we get to study data, right? So we get all this data about customer retention, and it's incredibly and painfully revealing of all these problems. So one of the things that we found is that, so I don't know if you've ever had the sense, but when you're all high-fiving and we save the customer, did you ever just have for a moment in the back of your mind a little bit of a pause saying, oh, I wonder if we really rescued this customer, or if what we did was just bring in a temporary delay. So of course, we got the data. We're able to test it. This is what's really fascinating, Joe. It turns out that customers who are rescued, who went into the red status and then, everybody dogpiled and got them back in, how do they retain after that? No one ever follows up. We got the renewal. We don't care about. It turns out they churn, almost all of them churn within the next 1 or 2 cycles.
Wow.
You didn't really save them. So this is terrible, right? So first of all, most rescues don't work, meaning they don't even renew. So something like our data shows, I don't know, the best performing rescue operations get like 20%, but it's more commonly like around 10%. Okay, so 1 in 10 is even going to renew, and all of those are going to leave you, which means, and I think this is a big picture kind of takeaway to the theme, Joe, which is what we think we're doing when we're doing really great, successful customer engagement, customer success work is frequently the worst thing we can do. Think of all the energy that got sucked into those rescues, right? And then they're not even going to stay. So what it tells me is that what passes as the standard, the gold standard of customer engagement, customer-centric behavior, is in many cases just a disaster story, almost as bad as the Scotland story, but just maybe not quite so acute, maybe a little bit more under the radar. So, then what does that mean? It just means you can't get into trouble with customers. Rescuing customers is not heroic. It's not a win. You get no credit for that. It doesn't work. The only way to prevent customer churn is to be able to predict it in advance. You have to know a customer is going to fail before they know they're going to fail. And so that's 100%. A very different approach. Anyway, that maybe sets up the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. I think, and you brought up a very interesting thing in the beginning, and I don't want to take this off track. I'll say why it's relevant in a minute, but I have a friend who actually, he runs a restaurant, fine dining restaurant. And we were talking about actually data and about giving a great customer experience and how you can customize it. There's so many different things at their disposal, right, from the beginning, and understanding like what people are ordering and so on and so forth. But he did say there's a caveat to that, right? If you start to give that personalized one-off experience, right, similar to what you're describing, right? Someone's flying out to Scotland, it's very murky waters where you're setting an expectation in the future for that one customer, which begs the question: is it really repeatable? Is it scalable? And then can you do that? And does it even bring back, what's the return, the ROI on it?
Right. If it's not scalable, by definition, it's not the right thing to do. Even if it's incredibly satisfying for both parties, it's irrelevant. It can't be the solution. And so this is where some of our research has come up that I think is very interesting, because It
Sure.
reveals that we also just don't even understand why customers stay, what the underlying logic is. So we have research. I talk about it all the time, but it's relevant to this conversation, which is it turns out making customers happy, which we think is the essence of customer success. I got to make them feel good, right? Because if they feel good, they'll stay. Everybody knows happy customers stay and unhappy customers leave. Turns out it's not true. It's like it's literally not true. And I suspected this. Everyone listening to this can run this test. Here's a test. Have you ever had a customer leave and on the way out say what a great experience it was working with your company?
True.
Yeah, everybody's had that experience. Probably yesterday you had that experience. That's how common it is, right?
Right.
Have you ever had the opposite experience where you have a customer that's unhappy and complains all the time and yet they keep renewing their contract? Yeah.
Happens.
Why? What gives? How do you make sense out of this? Well, I wondered about this, so I wanted to test it. And at first I only had my own company's data, but now we have what I think is the world's largest data set on customer retention data. And one of the things that happened in the meantime, which is kind of nice, is that everybody decided to use the same satisfaction scale, which is NPS. And so we have this huge data set, and we can just ask this question, very simple question. Does how satisfied a customer say they are predict how long they'll stay? The answer is no. It's not a weak correlation. It's a zero correlation. There's no predictive power in it. Happy customers are not likely to stay any longer than unhappy customers. And then here's the other one that kind of blows this up. Years ago, I met this guy who had been the COO of Sun Microsystems. This is a long time ago, but people remember it's a big company. Actually, they built the campus that Google lives in.
Wow.
So they had this thing they were trying to do where they divided their customers into those who'd had negative experiences, those who'd had bad experiences. They got it from the ticket data and they stripped out all the non-negative tickets, right? That kind of stuff. And then customers who hadn't had a negative experience, and they're, going to go chase down the negative experiences so they can get customers to be happier and stay longer. Everybody knows that's what works, right? So before they started though, somebody decided, well, we'll just take a baseline. What's the average lifespan for the happy versus the negative customers? And they were shocked to discover that the negative customers had more than twice the lifespan of customers who had not had negative experiences. And that shocked the heck out of them. How could that be true? What does that mean? Right? Well, one possible scenario is they got rescued, right? They had a bad experience. We swooped in, we fixed it, and that bonded them to us. We love each other now. That was great. Turns out that's not true, by the way, because a significant portion of the negative experiences were not rescued. They were not recovered, and the customer was never happy with the outcome. And in fact, that's true for the majority. So it turns out, we've repeated this study over and over again. We have the world's largest study. Again, turns out that exact result is consistent, more than twice the lifespan for customers who've had negative experiences. And once again, the majority of those negative experiences were never satisfactorily resolved for the customer. So you're talking about something. Well, then how does that even work? What does it mean? What should we make our customers have negative experiences? Is that the new methodology of customer success? Well, obviously not. It turns out it's because their happiness or their satisfaction is irrelevant to how long they stay. It's irrelevant. You think, well, gosh, how can it be? Here's how I would explain it. I had this experience. Here's a great story for your podcast.
Love it.
One of the worst customer experiences I've ever had was with the worst customer I ever had. The worst customer I ever had was Apple. Apple, man, they are brutal. They paid us a lot of money, but they were just brutal. Like negative, constantly complaining, never satisfied, demanding endlessly more. Nothing was ever good enough. And I mean, I had them for years. I lived in Silicon Valley, was over there all the time at their offices. And I was in a meeting at one point, and here's a cautionary tale. People, do not do this with a customer just because Greg Daines did, please. What not to do, right, as a customer. But I got frustrated. I'm human, right? And I said, hey, you know what? Time out. If you hate us so much, why don't you just cancel your contract? And the guy
Fair question.
Confused. And he said, why would we cancel when you get us such great results? And my reaction was to feel ashamed, because why did I ever think it was about anything else? Where did we get this idea that we're in business together to feel joy, to make each other feel happy and delight? How many times have you heard this? You have to delight customers. You have to, no, that's not what they were saying. And in fact, by the way, not only did they not cancel as a result of me being a jerk, they expanded and paid me more money and tormented me for more years. So what's the point? The point is, if we misunderstand what we're for, we will get way crossways on this, right? So all of this CS porn and all these stories about how wonderful it is when you go above and beyond and you surprise and delight. And first of all, it's not sustainable. So it wouldn't matter if it did work. But second of all, it actually doesn't work. It's not why customers stay. And that story revealed what the real factor is. Success, results. Results are why customers stay. They stay for results, right? If they think you're not going to give them results, they'll go somewhere else. And they may have had a wonderful experience, but it's irrelevant. They'll go somewhere else, right? Okay, so that's that story. And I have a couple more stories about this that reveal aspects of this. Since you're all about stories on this podcast, can I?
I love it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So at one point I had an exit and I joined another company that was a unicorn and was exploding, and they just raised $500 million a couple of days before I joined. And it was just like going crazy. And it was so cool. And their technology appeared to be incredibly cool. It was about selling more, basically. And very sophisticated early AI, very cool stuff. And I was excited because I had heard, not just from this company, but from their customers, how successful it was, how effective it was in raising their sales. Well, gosh, you don't get better results than that. You make somebody money, they'll never leave you, right?
Direct correlation to ROI, yeah.
So I have two stories about this. The first one was the negative story. The worst customer, the one that was on fire, the one that had been, in turmoil for months before I arrived. Everybody had been dogpiling, just that whole story. The CEO had been out, everything. Okay. So one of the first things I had to do, which you do, if those of you who are listening, when you get to be a manager or higher, what will happen? You will inherit misery. That's what you get for the medium bucks they're paying you, right? Okay. So I inherit misery. So I jump on a plane and I go out there. It's in Rochester. It's a big company. Everyone's heard of it. And they sat me down in a conference room, and there was a spreadsheet of problems, issues with the software, most of them technical, lots of things. And they had been curated for months. In every row, there were 189 rows, I'll never forget. In every row, extensive notes and documentation going back month about, what's the problem and what have we tried to do to resolve it and what's the current plan, all that. And I said, okay, there was a room full of angry people, right, that wanted me to know just how upset they were.
Sure.
And it's a big customer. So I said, okay, fair enough. You're going to take me through every row. I want to hear everything about it so that I understand it. And I will stay till then. And then I have one more request. So they did that 3 hours, row by row by row. I had technical people with me. Okay. And I said, okay, now here's my one request. Thank you for that. I understand them now. They're all important and we will fix them sooner or later. Okay. But
sure.
Here's the one thing I need from you. Can we go back through the list and you tell me which of these problems has affected your results? Because some of them are, affecting your results, and some of them are just, I don't know, cosmetic, technical, inconvenient, whatever. Fair enough. Sure. So I said, yeah. Do you want to guess how many of them were impacting their results?
Out of 189, you said? Maybe top 5?
One. And that one, only if you kind of squinted your eyes and turned sideways and, okay, maybe. They were shocked because they were sure they all affected their results. So I said, okay, this one's affecting your results. Oh, yeah. How? Well, it's annoying to Janine. Okay, but do we know that we're selling less? Because you see, the point is you can be very civil. And when they saw that, they were a little bit shocked because their entire mindset was that this whole thing was a failure for the company and a disaster. How many times have you been in this situation, right?
Oh, all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I said, look, this has been great. Thank you for this. We'll be following up. Where's your manager who didn't even show up to this? The person who owns the result we provide. Oh, he wanted us to take care of it. Okay. When they went off to lunch, I marched up to his office. He was in there eating lunch. I said, can I have 5 minutes? I want to show you the results you're getting from our product. He said, what do you mean? It's a disaster. I'm like, technically, but you didn't buy it for technology. You bought it to increase your sales, right? Yes. Have you seen how much your sales have improved? No. No one's shown you that. No, not even our person, not even our CSM, who we assigned to that account, Joe, had bothered to show them their results. Why? Because they had been enveloped in this black hole of technical complaining and misery, right?
Yep.
You've experienced this, right? So he looked at it and he was like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. How has no one ever shown me this? You see, his entire perspective on the program was based on these technical problems from people who don't even care about the result. They were technical people. They were IT people, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, that's just incredibly revealing. Do we know whether we're winning or not? In that case, we didn't know we were losing. Now there's a flip side of that is where we think we're winning and we're actually losing. But it just shows you, and I'll talk about some stories about that, but it just shows you how bad we are at actually knowing when we're winning. Like that's something we're just not good at. And I mean, we all have to kind of own that.
100%. Yeah, I think you bring up a very, very interesting point. And we actually had a conversation with and he was on the podcast as well, Alex Glick. He was at Outreach and a strategic CSM, and he sees it kind of in the same light as well. And you're right on the ball, right? It's happy customers do not equate to retention or expansion. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and this is, you could tell me if you agree or disagree, but this hyper fixation on adoption, right? And health score and all of these KPIs that essentially have been developed potentially in-house, right? Like based on what we think, if we being defined as the company of selling said product or the CS platform or whatever it is, or CS team, we define as KPIs as opposed to the actual customer's focus. And then this is pretty clear. I mean, we're talking about a sales platform, right? That is, built with AI in the background to increase sales. The fact that no CSM is bringing that up, that say, hey, this is having a direct impact on your revenue. It's mind blowing. And I think
it is mind blowing. And yet, let's be honest, how many companies and how many CSMs make that the centerpiece of their practice? Vanishingly few. It's scary. I mean, even my own past, I have to admit, I spent most of my career thinking adoption technology, like I did not really clue in on this. So to be fair, we all need to own the fact that we have not, I don't think you're customer centric because you want to know whether the customer loves you. Like that's the least customer. Hey, right. I'm customer centric. How do you feel about me? Like go on a date. Hey, I'm really interested in you, Joe. How do you feel about me? Like that's what we do, right? And so that I don't think you're customer centric unless you're measuring the customer's results and materializing back. So M&M, I call it, measure and materialize. Okay, so that's so we're really bad at guessing. So here's your point about health scores. Let me touch on that.
Yeah.
How good are health scores at predicting retention? Well, this one's tricky, okay? Because we get to look at this all the time. We have a huge data set. We see these all the time. Sure. People all the time come to me and say, our health score has a 93% prediction rate on who's going to churn. Okay, here's the problem with that. I don't even doubt it, by the way. I'm not even questioning whether that's technically true. Here's the problem. If I asked you, without any math model, Joe, which of your customers coming up for renewal in 3 weeks we're going to churn, you'd have a 93% accuracy rate too without any math at all. The problem is when can we predict that? Right? So we can optimize a model with machine learning and AI and whatever, and it'll tell me, oh, for sure these are going to churn. It's useless to me because rescues don't work. If a customer is already failing, first of all, it's not very impressive to know that. Okay? Right. So the health score is not impressive, but it's also not useful because it's too late. By the time a customer's failing, it's too late to save them. And so I don't care if your health score predicts who's going to churn in the next 90 days. I can't do anything about it. I have no use for that.
It's too late.
That's the whole dogpile story. So now what I teach is, look, you can't prevent churn unless you can predict it way in advance. And of course, a health model can't do that. Machine learning can't do that, because none of this, what I'm saying is you need to know they're failing before there's any signals of failure.
True.
How can we do that? Well, see, here's the issue. One of the reasons you can't rescue customers is because they're already checked out, right?
Yep.
So I need to at least know when they still think it's working. I still have to have that goodwill where they'll do things that I ask them to do and maybe change some stuff, right? Because that's why they're failing. Let's be honest. They're failing because they're not doing it right. That's why customers fail. Let's stop pretending otherwise. That's why customers fail. The customers succeed are the ones who do it right. Now that, yes, that includes adoption, but it's not just that. It's way beyond that. Okay. They're doing their business right. So look, we exist for the customers who aren't doing it right. That's actually why we do what we do. So, okay, fair enough. Their success is dependent on them doing it right, changing how they're doing it. Okay. So that's how I know in advance they're failing before they know. The way I know is that I can know early on if a customer is not going to do it right. So here's a classic thing. Everyone on this podcast can listen and ask this question. Have you ever been on a first call with a customer and you get off the call and you turn to your neighbor or your cat or whatever and you say, they're not going to make it? Now, like the crazy thing is, how could you possibly know? You just met them and you've already like given up on them. But the problem is you're probably right.
Sure.
Our data shows you're almost certainly right. How could you know? What could and you think about, well, what are kinds of signals that customers send that they're gonna fail and they're doing it right on that first call? All sorts of things, like the guy didn't show up who bought it, who's the one who owns it.
Huge red flag.
Handed it to someone who says, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I've been assigned. Like, I mean, they're done. Like, that's not going to work. Unless that can change, they're out. You could probably think of 75 more signals customers could send on a first call that are really pretty good predictors. And all of them share the same characteristic, which is that they're all signals of how the customer will behave. And I've just said the customers fail because of how they're behaving or how they're failing to behave. It's that's the best predictor. So if we wait till they're mad or frustrated or saying bad things about us or stop using the software, that's way too late.
Sure.
We can know they're going to fail the first time we get a signal that they're not going to do it right. And that could be in the first call. So people ask me all the time, could a customer be read after the first call? Oh, yeah. They could be read before the first call. How could they be read before the first call? Well, maybe they were required to submit something before the first call and they didn't. Guess what? They're read. Does that mean they're going to fail? No, but it's a really good signal. Why? Because it's an indicator that they're not going to do it right. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is what it comes down to. We're really bad at knowing who's going to fail before they fail. And if I intervene then and say, hey, look, we shouldn't have this first call without your leader being on here because we're going to talk about what matters and we're going to talk about how you have to change. Can we postpone this so we can get that person on board? That's what you should do. Right now, this raises a whole other problem, Joe. Sorry, I'm just going to town here on this whole CSM thing.
It's great. And I mean, it's 100% on point because at the end of the day, right, like, customers need to be bought in. You're talking about customer buy-in as being one of the core pieces. And I'm sure, like you said, there's hundreds more, but that's key. And I guess like a follow-up question I have, right, is how much of that is, because this comes up a lot, cross collaboration, like how much is that a balance between CS and sales, right? Because sales are pretty much the first kind of line of defense, right? Like they're the ones that kind of brought them on. Because I mean, if your customer doesn't have buy-in, like you might start to question, is like, how did they even get to this point so early on?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
The answer is brutal, but I'm at the point where I have to be very brutal in my career. The fact is that actually the majority of churn is caused by sales. And I'm not placing blame here. I've sold. I get it. I owned the whole thing. Why? How do I know that? How could I say that? Well, okay, let's think about why didn't that person show up to the first call? Somewhere they got the idea, whether we suggested it or whether we just allowed them to believe it, that it wasn't important for them to be involved, right? So here's how I think about it. If we sell, first of all, technology, which we mostly do, sell features, instead of results, we've already lost the game because they only stay for results. And if you sold features, then they're only thinking about features, and you get into that whole situation I had with that company. Okay, so that's a problem. So we have to sell results, which we don't. That's a problem. That's a major source of churn. But we also have to sell change. So here's the crazy thing. I spent time traveling with this guy, Dave Rudnitsky, who was the head of sales for Salesforce. There's a whole chapter devoted to this guy in Benioff's book. They call him the $60 billion guy. He built the world's most successful tech sales engine in the world. The guy was weird. He sold different than anyone I've ever seen before. Very strange guy. And we were in a airport killing time at a cafe or something. And I said, look, I got to ask Dave, why do you sell the way you do? It's weird. Okay. I'll talk in a minute about how it was weird. He said, oh, that's easy. Most salespeople, and this applies to CS, so listen in. This is all the same thing. He said most salespeople think they're having the wrong conversation. They think that the question in the prospect's mind is, does this thing work? Is it effective? Is it successful? He said that's not what they're thinking, or they wouldn't even be on the phone with you or in the meeting with you. That's not what's in their mind. I'm like, well, what are they thinking? He said the question in their mind is, will it work for me? Now, that's a totally different mindset. I'm like, well, okay, how's it different? He said, because the fact is, although they don't want to say it, they know they suck. They know that they have tried different things and it's failed at their company or failed, whatever. And now they're trying to figure out, yeah, they know it worked for such and such cool company that you tell the story about. What they're wondering is, given their limitations, will they be able to get results with it? And he said, that's totally different. So now let me tell you how he sold. It was so weird. He wouldn't talk about the software. He would not demo the software. He would not show the software. He would not do anything about that. The entire meeting was, are you ready for the software? Because look, this isn't for everybody. Okay. We exist to make people successful and get them results. But if you're not ready for it, then we won't get results and it's a waste of our time. So the first thing, the thing I'm going to do is just to figure out whether it's for you. Oh, it's interesting because you know how people are leaning back when you try to sell and they're like, yeah, prove it. Yep. People would lean in and they'd say, oh, no, it's for us. We're ready, blah, blah, blah. And he'd say, well, let's see. Are you willing to do? And then he would list off all the things they have to do to succeed.
Of course.
Now, can you imagine the dream your life would be as a CSM? if the salesperson had spent the sales process getting the customer's commitment to change how they work? Oh my gosh, that would be the greatest thing in the world.
Game changer.
Now, here's
absolute game changer.
About Dave Rudnitsky. He didn't care about CS. He could care less what happened after the sale. The only reason he did it that way was actually because it sells better. Sure. So this is one of the greatest things I've ever discovered, which is the way you would sell if you cared only about how long they stay, turns out to be the best way to sell just for sales. It's the best way to sell. People love it. They would lean in. They'd say, oh, no, we're ready. Let me prove it to you. Yeah, we can do that. I'll make sure that happens. And then suddenly they're like, okay, so show me how it worked. And then he would say, okay, I think you're ready. Now I'll show you the software. And not even in the same meeting. It was always in a separate meeting. The whole point was that it flipped the tables. Okay, so when you say, gosh, how much of this is about sales, et cetera, it's massively about sales, but before we just spend all our time throwing them under the bus, think how much that applies to what we do post-sale.
Of course.
So forget about how they were sold. What if it's not my business, which it usually isn't when I'm a CSM? Will that change how I do it? No, I should still start off with, what is the result you're here to achieve? Is it something we really deliver? By the way, you might be imagining a result that we don't actually deliver, but okay, good. So you do want the thing our thing does. Second, are you willing to do what it takes to get it?
Right.
Well, I didn't know that there was. I thought it was going to be easy. No, it actually isn't easy. You have to change something, and here's what it is. Oh, we could change that. Okay, if you'll do that, I'll guarantee you results. Now, think how different of an approach that is, Joe. Now go back to our satisfaction mentality. Here's the problem with caring about satisfaction. People are like, don't you care about whether your customers are happy? Of course I care about that. What kind of person would I be if I didn't care about that? Like, that's sick. But here's the problem. They do conflict. So if I prioritize happiness and a customer's doing it wrong, Do I call them out? Do I say you're doing it wrong? No, I think I don't want to piss them off. I don't want to annoy them. They're maybe already annoyed, and I'm not going to make it worse by telling them they're doing it wrong.
Right.
Not even just our product. They're doing their business wrong. I'm not going to say that. But if I know that it's irrelevant whether they're happy, it only matters if they get results, then I'll prioritize that and I'll speak up. So here's a great story about that. Lots of stories today.
Love it.
I had a client that sold software into dentists. Very useful software. It helps their customers show up on time, their patients show up on time, and that's a big money maker for dentists, et cetera. So it's very important. Good stuff, right? Good customer experience, everything. So here's an example of something that isn't an adoption thing. It turns out that, adopting this is the stuff, that reminds you have a doctor's appointment by text and by email and all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
just sending that out does improve show up rates. But there's one other thing these dentists should do that's outside the software. And it was to put up a little sign, you hate this, that says, if you don't show up at your dentist, we're going to charge you $15. You put that on the front desk. You've seen it, right? It turns out that if you do that, your show up rates go way up. That's really good for business. Okay. By the way, it doesn't matter, it turns out, whether you charge the money or not. You don't even have to charge it. You just have to threaten to. Okay.
Yeah.
But here's the point. All the time, the CSMs would have this experience where they'd make this recommendation to a dentist and they'd say, no, I'm not going to do that. And so this would happen all the time. So I was actually on a call with one of our CSMs. We'd trained how to have this conflict moment, right? Instead of focusing on making them happy, focus on making them money. Okay. So she was very young in her career and she was very terrified. And sure enough, I was listening live when one of these dentists said, I've been a dentist for 30 years and I've never had to do that. And I'm not going to start doing it now. She was terrified, but she had been taught the script. And here's what she said. Good for her. She piped up and she said, oh, I know. You know more about dentistry than I'll ever know. But we know about this, which is how to get your patients into those chairs so you can take care of their teeth. And I promise you, if you do this, it will improve that. And she did her thing. I was like, okay. And what did he do? He said, oh, okay. Yeah, we'll give it a try. You see how if you prioritize satisfaction, you end up doing the wrong thing most of the time. If you prioritize results, you end up doing the right thing. And in the end, they actually don't hate you. They actually do have a good experience. But you do have to choose which one is the higher priority. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. And I think it really definitely sums it up. And also, like, there's that blend of expectation setting too, right? I think you brought up a very, very good point, like even on the onboarding in the beginning or implementation, whatever it is, like figuring out what that is for success. Even it starts at the new business, at a time of new business, right? Like I think having them pre-qualify, even essentially as like the saying goes, like kind of going negative, right? It kind of just also disarms the customer. And then in the same light, right? The example you're mentioning, right? It's very disarming. It's like, of course you do, right? Agree with them. Of course, you know so much about, like, you have your 30 years of experience about teeth. Yeah, exactly. But this is how it's going to have an impact in your business. And that's what we know, and having that confidence. And it's definitely interesting
too, Joe, because one of the things we legitimately want in our careers as CSMs is to be the expert, at least on this thing. I'm not a dentistry expert, but I am an expert about this thing, right? You will not have your clients respect your expertise if you don't assert it. So one of the things we train people, and this is something, everyone should take away from this. Don't say, you might want to perhaps think about possibly considering maybe doing this thing I'm suggesting. You have just undermined your expertise irreparably. Here's what to say instead. Oh, I know you know your business, but we know this business and we know this works. Don't say, sometimes it works. Usually say it works. If you want customers to change their behavior, which we have to have that or they don't win, then I have to be much more assertive. I call it power statements. You have to say with power and clarity what they need to do. It's so funny. So many times back in the day, I'd find myself resenting a customer who wouldn't do it right. And I just, bitching about them. And then, there came a moment at one point when I stopped and I said, but was it clear what they were supposed to do? Well, I did mention it 6 months ago at the bottom of a call about something else. That's not good enough, right? That's not how, that's not owning it. And so I started to look at my own behavior and say, I'm going to be clear. I'm going to have a meeting where I just say these 3 things need to get done or you won't get the results that we agreed are important to you. Oh, really? Yeah. Does it matter when? Yes, they need to be done by August. Oh, really? Yes. Now, think, oh, what if they get mad at me? What if this ruins our relationship? That's the problem with focusing on the relationship and focusing on satisfaction, is that it will always undermine your efforts to make them successful. So it's just like you kind of have to wire your brain to say, look, I'm not here to make them happy. I'm here to make them money. And 100%. When I make them money, they may or may not be happy, but that's what we do, right? That's Apple, right? They still weren't happy. But the point is, that's actually what we're here for. And most customers do see that as a high value add and will value our relationship. But, just maybe one more story to highlight how bad we are at knowing who's in trouble or not. So
sure.
One of the things I do with my clients is I interview their successful clients. I don't interview failed customers. I think it's a waste of time. Asking customers why they leave is a waste of time. They don't really know why they left. They just know it didn't work, and they'll come up with something and it won't really be helpful. But sure. It is interesting to interview successful customers and ask them why they're staying. Very useful, right? Because whatever's driving their decision to say, that's what we need to bottle and reproduce and scale, right? Okay. So we interview these successful customers, but here's how we get into the interviews. I asked my client to nominate 10 highly successful clients. These are clients who would swear they're getting results. Okay.
Sure.
And then we'll interview about 5 of them. You think only 5? It turns out they all give you the same answer. So you don't need to interview 50 of them. Okay. That's a whole separate story. But here's what happens frequently. I'll get on the call with a successful customer, and 30 minutes later, I'll get off the call and I'll turn to the CSM and say, they're bright red and they're going to churn soon. And they will look at me like, what are you talking about? How? That was they're green. No, they're friendly. They're friendly, not successful. And those two are very different things. If I had asked you to prove in data that they were successful, you can't. And when you're on the call, of course, they give all sorts of signals like, no, we've loved working with this company, but, we're starting to look around because, we need this other feature. And, we haven't gotten an answer on whether you guys, like, they'll say things that CSMs don't pick up on as really bad indicators of something going wrong, like they're shopping or whatever. It's so funny. About 1 in 4 of the successful customers we interview isn't just unsuccessful, they're churning. And this is where we get this problem. And I say that the cardinal sin in customer success isn't churn, it's unexpected churn. Because if you can't predict who's going to churn, then you can't fix it and you can't prevent it. So even more important than ending churn is being able to just know who's failing, just know in advance who's failing. And this is kind of a classic thing. So that's the last, I would say, example, just to show how bad we are at guessing who's successful and who's failing.
No, 100%. Couldn't agree more. I think, to piggyback off that, in terms of, I've seen it a lot when it comes to customer success managers not being able to pick up those atypical, they're churn signals. I say atypical as far as the ones that they're unable to pick up, like the shopping. I heard an example recently where someone was working with a team and they were like, we saw that so-and-so is shopping for a new platform of competitor platforms as other than their own, and are dumbfounded as to whether that was a churn risk. And it's like, they're looking at other competing
not just
solutions.
A churn risk. It's all but done. You can write that customer off. Your chances of retaining them are ultra small.
It's true. 100%.
It's crazy, right? And so you're talking about a potential signal? No, that's like death. That's like terminal cancer. Write the will, get your affairs in order. It's over. And that's just incredible to me because, of course, for years I was oblivious to that. Of course they're shopping. Everyone shops. No, they don't.
Sure.
one of the things we notice about, because I keep talking about customers who churn, the data on customers who stay is really fascinating. You have a group of customers, everyone on this call, that will essentially never leave. Barring a meteorite or something else, they're never going to leave. And I call it customer bonding. And the question is why? Well, okay, one answer is because they're getting results. But it develops into a deeper answer. And what I call customer bonding is it's essentially about seeing you and your company as part of their success, as essentially integral to their success. They can't visualize their success without your company in the equation. And part of the reason is because they think of your company as a source of expertise, not just technology. They can buy that from anywhere, and technology is super easy to copy right now. They
Sure.
won't leave even when a competitor comes along for cheaper and better. They'll stay because they think of you as their partner in success and the source of expertise they need to do their business better. If you can become that, they'll never leave. That's a bonded customer, and it's incredible. It's so powerful. That's what fuels me. That's actually why I find this so fascinating. When you build that bond, it's unbreakable. It's way better than customer loyalty, which I'm questioning was ever even a thing. Customer bonding is a thing. We see it in the data all the time. And it's why, for instance, that young girl who was like in her first job, who was terrified to say the script, this is something we know. It's not because she had been there 20 years and knew the expertise. It's because the company had distilled this as a really important fact, truth. And she could express it as expertise and assert it in a very confident way because it's true. So for those listening, if you're a CSM and you're not sure, you know you're not an expert in whatever business. No, yes, you are. Okay, expertise is not encyclopedic knowledge of your business. Okay, so for instance, if I hire a golf swing coach, I don't want him or her to teach me 1,000 wrong ways to swing a club. I want him to teach me the one right way. And when you join a company, that's been distilled. And you can confidently say to a customer, as that girl did, this is better for you. It will be better for you to do it this way. If you want the results, you should do it this way. That's clear and simple, and it allows you to operate with a lot of confidence in a way that's valid. Now, when you do that and they see it works, then they come back to you next time and they say, hey, Joe, do you know anything about this other thing? Have you ever heard, what do the best companies do? What are your customers? How do they solve this? When you have those interaction, you're bonded. It's really like, so we've talked about negative signals we miss. There's a positive signal we miss all the time. When a customer asks you for advice, even especially if it has nothing to do with your product, that customer now sees you, is showing you that they see you as a trusted partner and a source of expertise. And you can say, I have no idea. That's not something I know about. Good. That's fine. It doesn't matter. They're indicating that you're bonded now. So that's something to look for. If you want to know, well, Greg, people are basing their idea of who's green on the wrong thing. What should they base it on? Well, number one, are they getting results measurable? Not just did you ask them if they're getting results and they said yes. That actually turns out to not be very reliable. You have to check to see whether they really are. Number two,
Right.
Do they indicate through their interactions that they value our expertise in any way? When you do that, bam, that's the win right there.
It's awesome. No, I think that's something that's often overlooked in terms of like that partnership bond. And that's like I think it's where you kind of redefine it essentially when we're talking about like relationship building. Like that's what you want, right? It's not just like, oh, we're nice with our customers. No, it's seeing you as a consultative partner. Yeah.
Exactly.
But good stuff. I know we're coming up on time, and I'm just curious as far as while we wrap up, where do you go to learn all this? Obviously experience, you've been in the game for so long, but I'm curious, like particular books, courses, right? Like obviously this isn't all traditional, right? There's no, at least as far as I'm aware, and this will obviously change, but courses on sales or customer success in like, standard higher education, universities. But I'm curious where you go to learn.
Well, so, I'm old, so I was around before this thing existed and I followed the development of it. I think it's fair to say that I still see it as somewhat young field. And so not only were there no good books or courses for me to grab onto, I think some of those are starting to come out. But I would just argue that even those which we should consume, I would say eagerly, all have evolving understanding of what works. So to be utterly candid, there aren't any really books or things, although I've consumed massive amounts of books, and sort of my method has been to glean truths from all sorts of different places. I mean, just as an example, I was reading this book on the military history of how the US managed the army during World War II. And it turned out there was a really interesting nugget of value in there about managing people and getting them in the right roles that's been valuable to me. So that's sort of been my thing. Now, the main thing, my background's in economics. I have 3 degrees in economics. I'm obsessed with data. And so I've been trying to get the data that didn't exist, right? What is the answer to this? Where does churn come from? Why do customers stay? And all those things. And so that's, for me, that's been the thing. I would recommend, in addition to reading widely, take it with a grain of salt. A lot of things that we know to be true aren't. And so just, approach it with that perspective. But then the other side is, do data, find data, ask real questions and let the data tell you the answer, right? I think that's something that in every company, there's data sources, right? So this, I said, you've had this experience where a happy customer leaves. How often does it happen? Check your data, right? But how often are we predicting who will churn 6 months in advance rather than 1 month in advance? Just start, to me, following those threads has just been the most interesting thing in my career. And to me, there's tons of that left. In every company, there's opportunities to do that. So I guess that's my recommendation.
It's awesome. No, good stuff. Couldn't agree more. But and where can everybody find you, Greg?
Well, if you want to learn more about me, I'm at gregdaines.com. All of my stuff is published on there. I have research. A lot of the things I've talked about, you can actually download the charts and research about the customer satisfaction and longevity and all that stuff. So go do that. There's free ebooks and everything on there. There's a free course on churn. Everything's free on there. Also, I occasionally post on LinkedIn, and there's hundreds of my posts out there that contain a lot of this stuff too. And then on my website, if you want to learn more, if you want to hear how I come in and unpack and fix churn, because we do it very effectively, there's a form on there. You can set up a meeting with me. So I would welcome it. I love meeting new people. So please reach out.
Awesome. Good stuff. No, we'll definitely put it in the show notes, but thanks so much for coming on the show, Greg. Really appreciate the conversation.
It's fun to talk to you, Joe. All right. Thanks.
Awesome. That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodastechtouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.